Welcome to a very special edition of Phil's Morning Drive. This is a car that I've been wanting to drive for about 15 years or more now, honestly. This is the Mercedes-Benz G63 AMG, the G-Wagon, or the Geländewagen, as they say. And this being the AMG version, it has a 563 horsepower, twin-turbo V8. It's got a ton of power. It's just such an insane car, and I've wanted to drive one of these for a long time. In fact, speaking of how long, this right here is a brochure that I found in my stash of magazines and stuff. This is for the 2003 Mercedes-Benz G-Class, and I remember spending a lot of time looking through this brochure and reading about the locking differentials and looking at all the different features and thinking, wow, this is such a unique car. It's so different than anything else that's on the road, whether it's an SUV, whether it's really anything. I can't think of another car on the road that looks like this, that has a feel like this. It's bonkers. That's the word I keep using as I'm driving this car around. So here's the deal. This is one of my dream cars, and I have 24 hours that I can use this car. I have 24 hours to drive it around, to film this episode, to do basically whatever I want with it within reason. But there's a catch, and this is the first time this has ever happened to me when I've been testing a car for the show. I'm limited on the number of miles. This is a 2017, it's brand new. Currently, we've got about 48 miles on the odometer, and I have to keep it under 100, which is a very hard task for me to do. I'm very nervous about this because it takes a lot of driving to film these episodes, but also, if it's a car I really, really like, I don't want to stop driving it. And this is a car I've dreamed about for so long, I'm a little nervous about this. So you're going to get to come along with me for this challenge and see if we can complete a video in the amount of time and the amount of miles that I have this car. Another thing, the sun's supposed to come out later today. This morning when I woke up, I got up very early to shoot this morning, and I thought, oh no, it's raining. The G-Wagon was in my garage, and I thought, oh, it's raining. I don't want to take the G-Wagon outside. It's all clean and it's pristine. And then I got to thinking, you know, that's probably what a lot of G-Wagon owners think. This car retails for $150,000. It starts in the low 140s. This has a few options for it, assuming you get the AMG version. If you get the standard version, it starts at about $119,000. So this is by no means a cheap car. In fact, until the Bentley Bentayga came out, this was one of the most expensive SUVs that you could get on the market, other than an absolutely fully loaded autobiography Range Rover, or perhaps a Porsche Cayenne Turbo S, or something like that. Two other SUVs that are pretty much in the insane category. The Bentley Bentayga now taking that new crown. And I know there's some other companies that are coming out with extreme SUVs. But nothing really compares to this. This is a car that's based on a military vehicle that was built by Mercedes back in the 1970s. And to be honest, it hasn't really changed a lot since that time. They've added a lot of luxury features since they brought the car to the US, which started in 2002, hence my 2003 brochure. But since that time, since 2002, they've added these AMG versions, and they've added a lot more horsepower in the engines. In fact, this car has 563 horsepower. I was looking through here, and back then it was called the G55 AMG, and it says it's got, yeah, here it is. It says it had 349 horsepower in 2003, which is kind of strange because you think, well, that's the high-powered version, and now the standard version has well over 100 horsepower more than what the performance version had not that long ago. The other thing I can tell you is that we're looking at lots and lots of luxury features that have been added, really, really nice materials. This car happens to have the carbon fiber trim. A lot of folks choose wood, but there's several different options. This carbon fiber really looks good, especially if you're going to go with the AMG version, which has more of the performance, so it kind of goes along with that. You're also seeing these beautiful seats. These are the AMG seats with this diamond quilted stitching. You've got that on the door as well. And you have a leather dashboard, you have a suede headliner. So it has that mix of modern feel, modern luxury, and old school feeling as well. With the locking differentials, it has a very, I guess you could use the word agricultural feel to the steering, especially at low speeds. I drove it out here to start filming, and yeah, at low speeds, the steering is very stiff. This car really kind of messes with your mind a little bit because you know that it's a 2017. You look at the odometer and you go, oh, we've got 62 miles on it or what have you, but then it drives like an old school SUV. It doesn't drive like a Jeep, but it doesn't drive like a Range Rover. It drives like a G-Wagon. So, most of my commentary today, as you can see, we are parked because I just can't afford to burn those miles for all of this. So, let's see if we can take it out on the road here in just a second. the big question that I think people have when you see this car on the road, and it's somewhat of a rare sighting, but if you do see one on the road, you start to think, well, that looks like a box on wheels. Maybe you don't really understand what this car is about. But the AMG version, the one that we're in today, that's the one I really want to focus on, because now there's even more crazy versions like the 6x6 and the 4x4 squared and those. But today I want to talk about this because this is a car that I think a lot of people see. If you don't know what a G-Wagon is and you see this car, you think, well, that just looks like a boxy car. I don't really understand. And then you tell people how much it costs and they're like, well, that doesn't make any sense. I'm very confused by this whole concept. But this really started out to be just the ultimate off-road machine, which it still is. But then they've added this engine that has 563 horsepower, 561 pound-feet of torque. It's a twin-turbo V8. It is an AMG-produced engine. It's the same engine that you get in other 63 versions of a Mercedes-Benz. And it's got all this power. The 0 to 60 time is 5.3 seconds. Now, let me give you an idea of where that puts it in the range of sports cars from not that long ago. That is faster than a late 90s Corvette in some cases. It's faster than an early 2000s Boxster, but not just any Boxster, the Boxster S. It's as fast as lots of different sports cars from the 90s, even from the 2000s, smaller sports cars. You can really freak people out at a stoplight by pressing the gas in this car because it's just quick. Okay, so you've seen some of the specs. You've seen my old brochure. You know this is my dream car. This is something I've really been dreaming about driving seriously for a long time. And now we're going to do it with the cameras rolling. So let me turn the engine on here. Now this car has quad exhaust and it has side pipes, which is adding to the craziness, by the way. They're basically just behind where the passenger's footwell is. So basically where the passenger's rear ends are, right underneath there are exhausts, and there's two on each side. And hear that? This car sounds like a beast. And it is. So that pretty much makes sense. Listen to this. That's only about 2,500 RPM. It redlines at about a little over 6,000 RPM. And it's got such a beefy sound to it. It's just, the car just makes you feel powerful. It makes you feel like you could just conquer anything, whether it be in a drag race or whether it be going off-road. It's just such a nutty car. Okay, so we've got it fired up. We're gonna drive it now. I'm limited on miles, got to keep that in mind. I'm going to do some commentary. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what it's like to be behind the wheel of the G63 AMG. Okay, so we put it in drive, and here we go. Immediately you can see at those low speeds that steering, it's just heavy. Everything about this car is heavy. You see that the doors, as we open those and look inside, they're just like lead, really. I mean, they really feel like an old car or an old truck or something from like the 50s or the 60s that has that, you know, kind of steel body and the steel feel to it. And this is, you know, a very heavy duty body, but it's not something that you expect in a car from 2017. It just kind of defies logic. The rear door for the cargo area is even more strange because it's so heavy that you really have to slam it. And the first couple of times I did it, I thought I was slamming it, but it wasn't shut. And I found out that the way to know if it's open is if the backup camera doesn't come on. The backup camera will only engage if the rear door is fully latched. And so I had to do that a couple times when I was putting some gear in and out of the back of the car before we drove it. Now here's another thing. This is not the smoothest road around, and if you're expecting this car to be luxurious in the sense of ride quality, it's not. It doesn't really have a rough ride or a bouncy ride. It has what I would call a firm ride, but not in the sense of a sports car. Because you're sitting up so high and because this is really geared to be for off-roading, it definitely has that off-road feel, but it's not necessarily a smooth ride. It really isn't. I mean, that's just how it is. You know, I think a lot of people that see this car, or if they're maybe interested in having an SUV that, you know, is in this price range, 120, 130, in this case $150,000, it really becomes a niche market. You know, if you go with a Range Rover, you know the ride's going to be smooth, but you still have very, very excellent off-road capabilities. If you go with a Cayenne Turbo S, you're probably wanting to get into some kind of a drag race. You know, the X6M or the X5M from BMW are much cheaper than this. There's a Range Rover Sport SVR, which has a lot of power. So if you're looking for 0 to 60 time exclusively, but to combine the two and to also just have the look of this car. The look of this car is just, it turns heads. Everywhere I've driven it so far, which has been limited, but everywhere I've driven it, people kind of look at it, they give you, I mean, it's just an attention-getting car. It's an attention-getting car, and that's really all there is to it. And I think it gets attention in a way that a Porsche Cayenne or, you know, a Range Rover doesn't necessarily get, because it just has such an extreme look to it. It's very boxy. These are the kind of cars that, you know, I was talking to my dad about this, and we were talking about, these are the kind of cars that we could draw whenever we were in art class in elementary school, and they'd say, draw us a car. Okay. And so you just draw straight lines, because I'm not an artist when it comes to that. And so this is the kind of car that we always drew, and maybe that's one of the reasons why I love this car so much. It's unapologetic about what it is. It's not compromised in any way. It's over-engineered, it's overbuilt, it has too much power. The capabilities most people will never use, probably even a third, honestly. I mean, I was talking to some folks about this, and they said, well, we know some people who have one, and they refuse to drive it on a gravel road, which I think is kind of a shame. I think the car needs to be driven off-road. I think it needs to be driven on-road. I think you should experience its full capabilities as much as you can. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're heading to this straightaway on these kind of roads outside of town, and I'm going to give it some juice here so you can hear this exhaust and hopefully get an idea of what the acceleration is like in this car. Here we go. I mean, it's just, the first couple of times that you start to lay into the gas in this car, you're kind of like, oh boy, you know, I don't think I want to do that. It's too scary, because it's just not like any other experience I've ever had. With this windshield being straight up and down, I mean, it's like just being slammed into the wind. I mean, any other car, a sports sedan, something like that, has more of a raked windshield, but this is just, it goes fast, but you're not really sure how it's doing it or why. You look down and you're going, we're going how fast? And it's making all this noise, and there's so much drama to it. It's just such an exciting car to drive. I guess we need to talk about pros and cons. Pros, the horsepower, the off-road capabilities, the luxurious interior, all these materials, everything you touch and see is just fantastic. So those are all pros. Some cons, the gas mileage, it gets about 12 in town, about 14 on the highway. So you're going to spend a lot of money in gas with this car. Because of the fact that this has such an over-engineered body, I know the insurance is quite expensive, so that's a con. As you can see here, I'm turning around. This turning radius is pretty much awful. I mean, that's a con. There's not a ton of room in this car. It looks like such a big, boxy vehicle, but there's really not a ton of room. I'm not that big of a guy, but there's not a ton of room for the driver. The rear passengers don't have as much legroom as what you would think. There is a ton of cargo space, which is really great. You know, as far as that cons list, you know, I look at this and I think, who cares what the gas mileage is? You know, I mean, who cares what the price of it is? Who cares about the space in the back? Who cares about any of that? This is a neat car to drive. I think it would be a neat car to own. It's such a unique experience. I don't know anything else on the market that feels like this, that drives like this, that rides like this. There's a lot of things that you have to kind of make concessions for. But if you like this and you get it, if this makes sense to you, then I think that you're going to love it. If it doesn't make sense to you, then I would suggest that you buy a Range Rover or a Porsche Cayenne or something else in that ballpark. But, you know, there's a lot of cars that I think, well, I don't really understand who would buy that or who would want that. But this car, I totally get it. I'd love to have one of these, just because every day will feel like an occasion. And when you put your foot down on the gas, it will defy all logic. It really will. Well, I really hope you've enjoyed this special edition of Phil's Morning Drive and getting to see what it's like to be in the Mercedes-Benz G63 AMG, the 2017 version. I've heard for 2018, 2019, somewhere in that range, things are going to change with the G-Wagon, but I hope not too much, because keeping with the traditional look and the traditional style, you know, there's been a few little things on the outside of the car that have changed since, you know, they started bringing them here to the US, and obviously they've changed since the 70s, but not a lot. And so I hope that they stick with that theme. I hope that they don't totally redo it and make it something that it's not supposed to be. If it could be better, I'm sure we could use more horsepower. Why not? I mean, there is the G65 AMG if you want to get a twin-turbo V12. It retails in the $200,000 range. But I just think this is a unique car. I think if you ever have the chance to drive one of these or spend any time in it, you should definitely do it, because it's an experience that you won't soon forget, that's for sure. Well, before we wrap up this episode, I need to say a big thank you to all my friends. I've got a lot of great friends up at Frank Fletcher Mercedes-Benz. They let me borrow this car for 24 hours. They didn't have to do that. I really, really appreciate them making one of my car dreams come true. They're not paying me to say this. They're just my friends. And so, by the way, this car is for sale. I should mention that. They're not telling me to say that. I'm just telling you that if you'd like to get this car, maybe you'd like to buy it for me. That would be great. Maybe then we could do a year in the life of the G63 AMG instead of just 24 hours. If you want to check out more great content from Phil's Morning Drive, we have videos, we have a blog, we're sharing a lot of photos on social media, and you can find links to all of that on our website at philsmorningdrive.com. We'll see you next time.